badmouthed him on the internet the other day, and he still came out and emceed for me, and of course thanks to Skylight. All right, so here's my new novel. It's called Madhouse Fog, and I'm just going to read a bit from the first chapter. I've been hearing a voice in my head lately. Not voices, a voice. It wasn't mine. I didn't want to listen to it. It still somehow convinced me to take a job at the Oakview State Psychiatric Hospital. The first thing I did on arrival at Oakview was to take a seat in the back row of a large lecture hall, between two empty seats. All of the hospital administrators and a good chunk of the staff were having their beginning of the year meeting there. I sat between two empty chairs and scanned the hall for Dr. Bishop. Despite what the voice in my head might tell you, I was not a patient at the psych hospital. I was a new employee. Dr. Bishop had hired me to write the grants to keep this facility humming. All the other voices in my head, which were all mine, I usually refer to them as thoughts, had told me to stay in Fresno, to find a way to breathe life back into my suffocating marriage, to keep writing the grants that would fund the community space that I'd helped to start and spent 15 years of my life running. For some reason, I listened to that other voice in my head. I took this job at Oakview and joined the staff at the meeting. An exceptionally short woman took a seat next to me. She said, "You must be Mr. Brown." She offered her tiny hand for me to shake. I shook it. It felt like a canary in my palm. "I am," I said. "How did you know?" She swept her bangs sideways over her right eyebrow and said, "I know everyone else in here is not Mr. Brown, so I made an educated guess." I nodded. She said, "I'm Dr. Bennett Helly." I didn't exactly follow. I asked, "Is your first name Ben or Bennett?" She said, "Mr. Brown, on hospital grounds, my first name is Doctor." I winced as if I'd been scolded. She patted my forearm. "We don't use first names on hospital grounds," she told me. "This way it's a little tougher for the patients to Google us and visit us at our homes in the evening." Before I could respond, her phone buzzed. She read the screen and started typing with her thumbs, and I went back to scanning the lecture hall. Dr. Bishop had emailed me and told me she'd be here. I knew a few things about her. I knew what she had looked like when we met the first time a decade and a half earlier. I knew what her voice sounded like over the telephone. I knew she used Verdana as her chosen email font, and that she had email stationery with a George Burns quote that said, "Sincerity is everything. If you can fake that, you got it made." None of these things helped me pick her out among the psychiatrists and psychologists and nurses and medical doctors and administrative assistants populating the meeting. All I saw was a bunch of too ordinary-looking employees, sweaters and slacks and big cups of coffee and worn-down briefcases and hard shoes and falling socks. In the room behind me, the chief of staff and an IT guy tried to get the computer and the overhead projector to talk to each other. The screen in front of the room flickered their successes and failures. Most of the staff chatted with each other or talked on cell phones or texted. At least 3 women knitted. Another woman read a paperback. She was brutal about it, folding it in half as if it were a magazine, really taxing the glue that bound the pages together. And amidst this scene, the professor appeared. Who could he be but a professor with his bow tie and his starched dress shirt and his sweater vest that was maroon of all colors, and his blue blazer and tan slacks and argyle socks and fuzzy bedroom slippers? He walked to the front of the lecture hall and stood in front of the podium and mimed the actions of opening a briefcase and taking out notes and placing them on the podium. And then he said, "Good morning, class." The staff quieted down somewhat. A low murmur buzzed through the hall. Everyone looked at everyone else, perhaps waiting for someone to do something. Glances ricocheted off one another. No one took action. The professor spread his arms as if to hug the entire lecture hall and said, "Can I get a huzzah?" One of the knitters paused mid-stitch to shout back, "Huzzah!" "All right," the professor stepped away from the podium. "One student is awake this morning. And it's okay if you're half asleep, because we're here to talk about that realm between sleeping and waking." He put his arms behind his back and paced in front of the screen. The light of the overhead projector flickered on, broadcast an error message, and then faded away. The professor drifted into a lecture about Shuang Tzu and his famous butterfly dream. The story was familiar to me, and it was far less interesting as the professor's conviction. He seemed really convinced that he was in front of a classroom, really convinced he was teaching a class at this moment. I have to say, I got a little excited. This was exactly the type of madness I was hoping to find in my new job at a mental hospital. The rest of the staff was less amused. They pulled out cell phones and put their thumbs to work, either dialing or calling psych assistants. Dr. Benningheli leaned over and whispered, "Well, this wasn't on the agenda." "Should I do something?" I asked. "Escort this guy somewhere?" She shook her head and patted my knee. "Relax," she said. "Sometimes things don't go as planned." I met her glance and smiled. How could I not? Look at those eyes. Such a deep, rich brown, like an old rosewood fretboard. The professor continued his lecture. He recited a Schwang Su poem. "The one who dreams of drinking wine in the morning may be crying. The one who dreams of crying in the morning may go hunting." I actually recognized this poem. I majored in religion with a focus on Eastern studies way back in the college days. The final lines of the poem rang in my head. I raised my hand. The professor pointed at me. "Yes, you in the back row." I recited the last two lines. "This kind of talk, its name is bizarre." Dr. Benningheli whispered in my ear, "You said it." Several of the staff members shot me dirty looks. The professor smiled. Someone did his homework. Before he could say more, the screen behind him reflected the image of a PowerPoint display, a fake notebook page, and a little pencil in the corner, and computerized script reading "Happy New Year." Another man emerged from the doorway in front of the lecture hall, just to the left of the screen. He wore the uniform, boots, blue slacks, work shirt, polyester jacket of a Roads and Grounds employee. He walked up to the professor, touched him gently on the elbow, and muttered in his ear. The professor nodded. "I apologize," he said. "Today's class will be canceled. Please consult the syllabus for Thursday's reading." The professor and the Roads and Grounds guy headed for the exit. The psych tech and his scrubs waited there. The three walked out into the crisp January day. The meeting ended at 10:30, which gave me more than 6 hours to figure out what to do on my first day at work. The staff ambled out of the lecture hall. I sat there looking for a bright idea or for Dr. Bishop. When neither one of them emerged, I moseyed out of the hall too. I wasn't quite prepared for the winter day that greeted me outside. It was one of those coastal Southern California days that looks so beautiful when you see it outside a window, but when you step out into it, it's wet and cold. I wasn't wearing the right clothes for it. I didn't really own them. Or more precisely, I did own them. I had jeans and hoodies and even a leather motorcycle jacket with a rusty x-ray specs pin on the lapel. But none of these were going to help me on my first day of work in a professional setting. And though I'd been more or less a professional the whole time I worked at the community space, I'd been my own boss. I could wear whatever I wanted. This new job at an institution was different. It felt like I needed a uniform of sorts. So I dug out my tan Dickies slacks and a white dress shirt that someone had left in my house years ago. I'm sure it hung loose on me in that hand-me-down way. I probably didn't look very professional. I probably looked like my dad was a professional, and I raided his closet and dressed as him for Halloween. My brown loafers had dust in the seams. Dr. Benningheli looked professional. She came up to me warm and confident on this January day, wearing this stylish wool pea coat that she probably picked up at the junior section of an upscale department store. She said to me, "You look lost." "I am a little," I said. "A psych hospital is a bad place to look lost. Someone will find a room for you sooner or later." And don't you know, it's exactly what I was thinking. Dr. Benningheli nodded vaguely in the direction of some buildings to the east. "Come on," she said. "I'll show you to your office." "I'm waiting for Dr. Bishop," I said. She nodded. "Dr. Bishop isn't here today. She asked me to show you around." I paused a second to chew over this information. Dr. Benningheli started to walk away without me. I said, "Wait." She stopped and turned to face me. "If you're supposed to show me around, why do you let me wander out here lost?" She smiled. "Just to mess with you," she said. Those beautiful eyes of hers made the smile all the more sinister. I gathered that Dr. Bettinelli felt like blowing off work for most of the morning because she showed me every nook and cranny in the hospital. She walked me through the therapy rooms, the doctor's offices, the medical hospital, the gym, the cafeteria, the Alzheimer's lab, the arboretum, the cottage once inhabited by the robber baron himself, R.W. Winfield, the psych textbook, the post office, the library, the art gallery, the different dorms that house different patients according to their different degrees of craziness, the chapels and synagogues and confessional booths, the archives, the canteen, the administration building, the Rosie Brown's office, the volleyball courts, the swimming pool, and the weight room. When it was all done, we headed to my office in the direction of the Williams building. Your office, she told me, is just behind the dual diagnosis door. She explained to me that dual diagnosis meant the patients suffered from both addiction and mental illness. It's not as bad as it sounds, she said. We like to pathologize everything these days. We can always find a diagnosis for you if we need one. That's what the voices in my head keep telling me, I said. Right, she said, it's psychotic disorder, NOS. Dr. Bettinelli opened the door to the dual diagnosis ward and led me through. We passed the therapy room with the group session in progress. I peeked inside. The patients looked like the type of crowd you'd find at a county fair. Overweight men in overalls, middle-aged women with thick makeup and cheap hair dye, skinny young women with exposed midriffs, skinny young men with flat-brimmed hats and sunken eyes, old men with the chalky skin of day laborers. They slumped in plastic chairs and lit one cigarette off of another and sucked on coffee in styrofoam cups. I paused for a second too long, because right there, in the middle of this group session, with her own sad eyes and styrofoam cup, sat the second woman I ever loved, Lola Diaz. Dr. Bettinelli grabbed my arm. Quit gawking, she said. It's time for us to get back to work.